We are recording the presentation tonight so that we can post it on YouTube. So if you want to go back and review any of the information, it will be on YouTube in a couple of weeks.
Okay. So just a brief introduction. I'm Melinda. This is Jen, Heather, and Rich, and we're all with the Beaver County Conservation District. Okay, so we're going to speak about erosion and sediment control, and we're also going to speak about water obstructions and encroachments. So those are two different things that we administer and regulate. Okay, so the first topic is going to be on erosion and sediment control. So why are we talking about erosion and sediment control? Well, sediment is the greatest contributor to pollution in our state's waterways. So did we all know that? Okay, so the most concentrated sediment releases come from earth-moving activities. And what can happen when we put a lot of mud into our waterways is we fill up our waterways and it has less volume in our streams to carry water when we have large storm events. And what happens is when you have less capacity in your streams during a heavy storm event, that's whenever you get all the flooding. Whereas if we had a clean stream and not the extensive erosion on the stream bank, your water is able to flow up and go into your floodplain, and it actually acts as a stormwater management facility. But if we have a real bad erosion on the stream bank, it channelizes that water and it makes it go faster, and that's why we have all the flooding. So sediment plays a key into the degradation of our streams and flooding. It also plays a role in cost in treating our drinking water. Blue-green algae is created from nutrients transported by sediment. So you've probably seen on the news lakes or ponds that have real bad algae growth. That's not good, because if you go in and swim in there, you could get sick. And then ultimately, sediment will smother fish and aquatic bugs, and it declines our fish population. So that is the reason why. So a brief description of our delegation under Chapter 102 stems from the Federal Clean Water Act. And that's under Section 402. It prohibits anybody from discharging any pollutant, which could be industrial, municipal, stormwater, through a point source into water of the U.S. unless they have been authorized an NPDS permit. So the NPDS permit is a federal permit underneath the Clean Water Act. The federal Clean Water Act, they then delegate that to all of the states, and the states delegate that again down to the conservation districts. And basically our Chapter 102 is underneath that permit, which is basically a guideline on how to implement the Clean Water Act. So that's how we are involved. So what does that mean? Earth disturbance activities. That's Chapter 102. So earth disturbance activities can be defined as land clearing, grubbing, grading, excavation, construction of an embankment, land development, ag plowing or tilling, operation animal heavy use areas, timber harvesting, road maintenance, oil and gas, well drilling, mineral extraction. So any of those activities, if you're doing 5,000 square feet or more of earth disturbance activities, you're required to have a written erosion and sediment pollution control plan. Now somebody had the question of, well, what happens if it's less than 5,000 square feet? If it's less than 5,000 square feet, you should still be implementing E&S controls, which are basically, we'll get into that later, but they're controls that minimize muddy water from leaving your earth disturbance activity site, so that it's not going into a waterway of that sort, or into a storm drain, because storm drains lead to a stream eventually. So roughly 5,000 square feet is about the size of a basketball court.
What about just generalized farming, you know, like just plowing the fields like it's been done forever? Do those
I'll get
fall
to
into
that in a couple of minutes.
Yeah, this is just a general overview. So ag plowing and tilling is also considered an earth disturbance activity, but they have different criteria than your residential or commercial. Okay, so then once we get to 1 acre of earth disturbance, now you are bumped into the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, which we abbreviated as the NPDS Permit, that is underneath that Federal Clean Water Act. So anything 1 acre or more, which is roughly the size of a football field minus your end zones, you are required to get an NPDS permit. And that authorizes the discharge of stormwater into waters of the Commonwealth related to earth disturbance activities. Make sense? So we also are going to be talking a lot about this best management practice that we will refer to you as BMP. And what that is, they are activities, facilities, measures, planning or procedures that minimize accelerated erosion and sediment, manage stormwater, and they protect, maintain, reclaim, and restore the quality of waters before, during, and after earth disturbance activities. So when we refer to BMPs, it could be a structure, it could be an activity, it could be a measure or a construction sequence. We refer those as BMPs. So general overview of why we're here talking about Chapter 102, Erosion and Sediment Control, is erosion is a natural process. And when we put in human activities, we alter that natural process and it increases the rate of erosion. So basically, accelerated erosion by human activities, that is what we're regulating underneath the state's Department Environmental Protection Chapter 102 program. So the goal for Chapter 102 is to minimize the accelerated erosion and the result of sedimentation. Jeff?
So let's say I have erosion on a stream on my property and it's starting to wash out a tree. Do I contact the district if nothing man-made has occurred in that stream?
Well, as far as Chapter 102, that's more like 105 stuff. So Chapter 105, if you want to go in and fix the stream bank and put in some sort of wall or gauge basket or riprap, then you would need to contact the district to figure out what type of permits, waivers underneath Chapter 105. Okay, so Chapter 102 is earth disturbance activities, but it does not include in-stream, in a wetland construction. We're going to get to that in Chapter 105, which is after Chapter 102.
I have a small creek,
Yes.
and above that small creek, people have traditionally placed lawn,
Debris.
lawn cuttings
Yep.
and leaves, and things of that nature. I want to put a pipe in that creek so I can fill over it and expand my park to a city length, a city block length. Is that when I contact you all?
That is underneath Chapter 105. You could start with us or DEP. But again, so anything in a stream or in a wetland is Chapter 105, which we'll get to after we talk about Chapter 102, which is the earth disturbance part.
Can I just
add on to
Yeah.
that. What we do are GP7s, which are minor stream crossings, minor road crossings, where we currently don't put a culvert in the stream, but in terms of paving a whole stream, that's what.
Culvert's a better term.
Okay, so if it's a culvert, yeah, contact us.
Okay.
And if it's actually a stream that has less than 100 acres that drain to that point, then you would likely qualify for a waiver, which you also get from DEP, and then you wouldn't need a permit. So just contact us.
Okay, good.
And we'll go into more detail whenever we get onto the chapter 105 portion of it. I'm still kind of like under the overview here, but we're gonna get to Rich, who's gonna speak about the Ag 102.
Okay, I'm going to talk today. Can you press the button for me, please? All right, I'm going to speak about the agricultural portion of 102. It's 102.4, a particular section, and it's a little different from the rest of 102. So, we all like a field of sunflowers, but if you have a big giant field of sunflowers, you do need to have an Ag E&S plan for your farm. So hit the next button. So who needs an agriculture erosion and sedimentation plan? Obviously, if you've got 50 acres of corn and wheat and hay, you probably do. Hit the next button. So this is how the state defines it. And they got a whole flow chart, but let's keep it simple. If you plow or till, including no-till, more than 5,000 square feet in total, or if you have an animal heavy use area that's 5,000 square feet or more, then you need a plan, a written plan. So, all farms that till more than 5,000 square feet or have an animal heavy use area, that's your muddy barnyard area, more than 5,000 square feet must have an agriculture erosion and sedimentation control plan. They do not have to be submitted to the district or to the state, but they must be kept on the farm and available upon request. So if there's a complaint, somebody's complaining about your farm, I'm usually the first guy that comes out. First question I ask is, show me your paperwork. If you got your paperwork, you're 98% of the way there. Next slide, please. So, what must be included in an agriculture erosion and sedimentation plan? Next button. Okay. It must identify the farm and all the tracts of the farm. It has to have best management practices on cropland, hayland, pasture, used to limit soil loss to T, the tolerable soil loss. And the federal government determines what the tolerable soil loss is for each soil type. That's the U.S. Department of Agriculture does that. So you also have to have conservation best management practices to minimize erosion in fields with less than 25% plant or residue cover and within 100 feet of a stream. So soybean fields that are harvested often do not have 25% cover going through the winter. So you have to have best management practices to minimize erosion and manure loss from any of your animal heavy use areas. And you have to have an implementation schedule for implementing these practices. And it has to be in your plan how you're going to maintain that over time. Next slide, please. So you have to have maps with your plan that show streams, lakes, and rivers, field and property boundaries, your animal heavy use areas, roads, and where your best management practices are going to be. Next slide, please. A current, and I repeat, current NRCS, that's the Natural Resources Conservation Service, U.S. Department of Agriculture, conservation plan probably meets your agriculture erosion and sedimentation plan requirements. So if you work with NRCS, you're probably covered already. If not, you can write your own plan by going to the PA OneStop, which is a Penn State University website. And they also have a new, it's only a year old or so, Soil Erosion and Sedimentation Control Manual. The Conservation District can help you write a plan. Give me a call. I come out, I help farmers all the time. I help you write a plan. Doesn't cost you anything, keeps you legal. Next slide, please. Here's just an example of the PA OneStop website. If you go to that website, which is through Penn State Cooperative Extension, it's real easy to draw a map of your farm. Although a sketch map, hand-drawn, does meet the technical requirements. Next slide. Here's just an example of how you can draw fields in your farm. Next slide, please. Okay, so agricultural erosion and sedimentation control plan, if I ever come out to a farm after there's been a complaint, I look at their plan and I have a whole list of things that I look for to make sure their plan meets the requirements. That's a whole lot, but it's really not that complicated. I sit down at the kitchen table with the farmer for an hour, hour and a half, and we can get something, get his plan on paper that'll meet his requirements. 95% of the time, there's no change in his operation. It's just a matter of having the paperwork you need. Occasionally, you know, we have to work with the farmer to fix something, but most of the time in this county, most of the farmers are pretty much doing things okay according to the rules. They just don't have the paperwork. That's what I get people on all the time, because they don't know that they need to have the paperwork because they just haven't worried about it. Next slide, please. So, an NPDS permit, as these ladies have talked about. So if you're building a new barn and you're disturbing more than an acre, or you're building giant roads on your property or something like that on your farm, and you're disturbing more than an acre, then you fall into some of these other permits that the ladies are talking about, the NPDS permit. It's as if you're building townhouses, is the same as a barn if you're gonna do that kind of construction. Next slide, please. Okay, and I would be remiss if I didn't touch on something else, because I also handle manure and nutrient management program for the state. It's not part of 102, it's a separate box, it's a separate set of rules. But I wanted to mention it because erosion and sedimentation and manure management go hand in hand. They work together. So I just want to mention real quick of who needs a nutrient management plan or a manure management plan. So all farms that land apply manure must develop and implement a manure management plan. If you have more than 2 animal units per acre of cropland, hayland, and pastureland, then you need a higher level nutrient management plan. And a animal unit is 1,000 pounds. So if you have 10 horses and no pasture, you would need a higher level nutrient management plan. So if you have less than 8 total animal units, a manure management plan. So if you have 7 horses, you don't need that higher level plan even if you don't have any pasture. Because a light horse is 1.1 animal unit, 1,100 pounds. So, all right, next slide, please. So I just want to go over a couple best management practices. That's big blue stem, which is a native warm season grass. And that's one of the options farmers can use for erosion control. And it's great for wildlife. And that's just one best management practice. Next slide, please.
Rick, sorry, what was that again?
That was big blue stem, a native warm season grass. This here shows a cover crop. You can see the fall leaves in the background. So if you don't have a cash crop in your field, you don't want bare soil all winter. You want to put a cover crop on that to hold the soil and hold the nutrients in until your next cash crop. Next slide, please. Pretty please. There you go. So no-till farming is still considered tillage, but you're not flipping the soil. So you can see in this newly planted corn, you can still see the residue, the litter from last year's crop on the surface. That helps protect the soil whenever you have cover. So if you have the litter from last year's crop on your field, that does to some extent hold the soil. And if you don't plow up the soil, you keep that on top, and that reduces erosion and helps keep the nutrients on the field. You don't want the nutrients that you pay for washing down into the stream. Next slide, please. Here's what we don't want to see. We've got a stream going through the crop field, and you can see he's planted to within a foot of the stream. So anytime he puts down nutrients, manure, fertilizer, herbicide, anything, it's going right into the stream. And that's what we want to avoid. So we encourage farmers to have a buffer between the water and their crop field.
How wide?
Minimum 35 feet. And that's what the state says. But hey, 15 feet is better than 0, as you got here. Because anything you do on this field is going right into the stream.
Would that be the same if you had a pond on your farm?
Yes.
Same thing.
Yes, same thing. So this is what I encourage people not to do. Next slide, please. So if you have animals, the whole idea is to get the animals' water up on the high and dry and not have them stomping down into the stream all the time. These are things for farmers to work on, best management practices to help them improve their operation, reduce erosion, reduce sedimentation, improve herd health over time. Next slide, please. One of the big things is pasture. The state defines pasture as cover at least 3 inches tall throughout the growing season with minimal bare spots. So this is about 3 inches tall, minimal bare spots, so that's pasture. We've all seen fields where the horses or the cows have been out and it's a giant mud hole. That does not meet the standard of a pasture. And we try to help people to manage that land better so that it can be pasture and not be a source of erosion and sedimentation into the streams. Next slide, please.
You're done.
Okay, well, hit the next slide to the next person's thing.
So my yard is a pasture.
Do you graze animals on it?
No. But the description you just gave is my yard. There's just no grazing animals. The deer.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Pasture is defined by 3 inches high with minimal bare spots during the growing season, and you want to keep it at 3 inches high over winter or better. So your lawn, most people's lawn's less than 3 inches high, but you're not tilling it up, you're not having animals drop manure on it, just all the deer manure, but wild deer are not covered under nutrient management or manure management. Cats and dogs are not covered.
What if,
Everything else is covered.
what if it's a deer farm?
Then it's covered.
That's
If
okay. I
it's-
don't know.
Yeah.
If it's a deer farm, it's covered under the Nutrient Management Act.
Okay.
If it's cats or dogs, that's a separate set of rules. So chickens, llamas, cows, horses, all that, pigs, all that is covered under these two programs that I mentioned. Yes?
Under chapter 102.4, let's say I'm a single family resident that have 7 kids, I was busy. And my garden's 50 by 100. Do I have to have a conservation unit?
If it's more than 5,000 square feet, so you're right on the edge. So I would tell you to make it 4,999.
So it doesn't matter if it's actually sold, it can be for private use.
Yes, if it's for your garden to feed your family like mine is. Mine isn't quite 5,000 square feet, and we're keeping it that way.
You had mentioned heavy animal use footage.
Yes.
So is a pasture considered heavy animal use or just the area like adjacent to a barn or?
No, a pasture is not considered. If it meets that standard, it's pasture and it's not an animal heavy use area. If you have 5,000 square feet, usually they're adjacent to the barn, but they could be out in the middle of the field, could be anywhere. If you have a big dirt spot, then that could be an animal heavy use area. If it's a smaller area, it's called an animal concentration area. If it's a small area, like under the shade of a tree where the cows like to get, that would be an animal concentration area. Those are usually not considered a problem unless they're right on the edge of a stream.
So the idea there is to have a filter strip, some kind of filter.
You want always to have space, you want to have good vegetation, pasture, hayland, or forested riparian buffer or something between where your animals are concentrated, where you're putting your manure, and the stream. The stream I showed there, if he puts manure on there, the first rain, it's going right into the stream. If you have a vegetated buffer between the stream and where you're putting your manure or your fertilizer or any of your pesticides, then it has that 35 feet of vigorous vegetation to filter it before it gets down to the stream.
So if I live in an urban area or suburban area and I have 10 chickens, do I have to have a manure plan?
Yes, if you have one chicken, you have to have a manure plan. The manure plan is free. I can help you write it, or you can write it yourself. It doesn't have to be approved by anybody unless the neighbor complains, which I've had the neighbor complain about the neighbor's chickens in the more urban areas. I go, I ask for their paperwork, and you're allowed to have chickens. There's no reason you can't, but you have to follow the rules. Those rules for the backyard chickens probably next year are going to change and be even simpler for those small backyard chicken. But that's still rules in the works. You're still under the older paperwork, which is a little more, it's just a couple extra pages. And it's easy to take care of. Yes?
So, many communities permit up to 4 to 6 chickens. And they have to be in a, maintained in a pen area
Mm-hmm.
and so on. So what you're saying is that each one of those individual families that have 4 to 6 chickens have to provide for a manure.
They have to have a manure management plan in writing, yes. All they have to do is call me. We'll get them squared away.
I'm sure
Yeah.
most local ordinances have no idea that there is a requirement for a manure management plan.
Yes, there is.
And that goes with pygmy goats,
Anything except cats and dogs.
yes, pig donkeys.
Anything but pygmy goats.
Anything but cats and dogs.
Oh, I thought you said anything
Cats
but
and dogs.
pygmy goats. I'm like,
Cats and dogs are covered under a separate set of regulations.
Okay.
They can poop wherever they want, as long as it's yours.
That's a whole nother set of rules that we do not deal with. It's not part of 102. It's not part of the manure management state rules.
So what would the limit on the number of chickens? Is it 1 chicken or up to 6?
If you have one chicken, you have to have a plan. You can have as many chickens as you want after that. The state doesn't care how many chickens you have, as long as you have the proper plan.
Unless you get over 1 animal unit per acre.
2 animal units per acre.
I'm sorry.
So if you're doing a chicken barn with 40,000 chickens in it, you might fall into a higher level nutrient management plan, which is a whole nother ballgame. We can help you with that, but that's a whole nother level. Nobody in Beaver County, I take that back. Very, very few people in Beaver County would need a higher level nutrient management plan, which is much more complicated. The people that need them have a lot of horses and no pasture. then they have to have a higher level nutrient management plan. Those are the people that need that higher level plan in this county. If you go to Lancaster County or some of these other counties, these big, really large dairies, they would need that higher level nutrient management plan.
So is it limited, I'm asking this because it's different, but we have people that are bringing in turkeys.
Need a plan.
So any kind of fowl,
Any livestock, and livestock in Pennsylvania is pretty much anything except a cat or a dog.
okay. Okay.
You folks done with me?
Yeah, good job.
All right.
Are we gonna come up with any other random animals to ask about?
I'm
Bradys?
trying to think of one.
One
Rabbits.
idea here is to test the staff, so.
Yeah. He's
Oh, by the way, the people who came in later, that's Jeff back in the back, who is the district manager for Beaver County Conservation District.
I know.
Hold on.
Okay, so now that we got ag out of the way, we're gonna talk about non-ag activities. So anything 5,000 square feet or more, which could be a house, an addition, a garage, a logging operation, a waste area, dump site, a borough site, you would require to have an erosion and sediment pollution control plan. And like Rich said, you're not required to submit it to the conservation district unless the municipality is requiring someone to do that. So if the municipality does not require the resident to submit an erosion and sediment pollution control plan to the district for review, you are not obligated to send it to the district. Okay?
What is the difference between the soil and erosion plan versus a stormwater management plan?
So,
What is-
so I will get to that.
Okay.
So at 5,000 square feet or more, but under 1 acre, you do not need to have a stormwater plan. Just an erosion and sediment pollution control plan. So once we get past that 1 acre, then it bumps you into this NPDS permit. So the NPDS permit then puts you into the permit which authorizes stormwater discharge. And that's when you have to submit a stormwater plan along with your erosion and sediment pollution control plan. So go ahead. So for an NPDS permit, it could be residential, commercial, large buildings, waste sites, borough sites, timber harvest, road maintenance. Any of that, you're required to get an NPDS permit, and like I said, that is associated with a stormwater plan. And then if we go into more detail of the NPDS permit, you have two types of NPDS permits. You have an individual permit and you have a general permit. So just briefly, for the individual permit, that bumps you into a more specified permit that has specified permit conditions. And what bumps you into that is the permit has 16 eligibility criteria. And if you fall within that eligibility criteria, those 16 items, which I'll name a few here that are mostly common, which is your stream designation classification underneath Chapter 93, and that program basically rates the streams in our communities based on supporting fish, bugs, and water quality. So the different types of stream designations that you can have are warm water fishery streams, cold water fishery streams, trout stock fishery streams, and then what bumps you into an individual permit is the high quality and the exceptional value water streams. So if you have a stream running through your property and you're going to develop it over 1 acre, it's going to be bumped into an individual permit. So for Beaver County, what's one of the streams that are high quality?
I want to say Delworth Run. Most of them are north,
It's
like
it's
northern.
Little Beaver, Service Creek,
There's
and
only like
then
three.
there's one more.
Part of Traverse coming out of Raccoon Creek State Park.
There you go.
Okay. Another criteria is if you have hazardous pollutants on your project. So say it was an old orchard and they sprayed pesticides on the property, that could be contaminants in the soil. So that would all have to be put into the permit, and that would bump it into an individual permit. Like I said, the individual permit is basically an NPDS permit, but you have specific conditions of your permit to follow. Whereas the general permit is anything that doesn't fall into the criteria on your permit. And so, for example, I have pictures here. So we have a nice stream, which is probably an exceptional value stream. So if your project discharges into this stream, then your permit is an individual permit. And then on the right-hand side is an industrial site, an old industrial site. And if your project is that being redeveloped, you're going to be bumped into an individual permit. Along with the individual permit, you have to put in different types of BMPs. So they are called ABAC, and you're going to ask me what that means. And that stands for Anti-Degradation Best Available Combination of Technologies, which is just a more beefed up control, which I'll get into later on what the difference of those are. Okay, so going on. This is DEP's E&S Pollution Control Program Manual. So you can Google any of these topics. You can do DEP construction stormwater. That'll take you to their website, and you can look and you can download this manual. But this manual is going to be your best friend if you're wanting to find out different types of BMPs to use. It has checklists on how to prepare an E&S plan, but this is going to be your best friend if you're going to create a plan. And so if, say we're just doing an E&S plan and it's for your house. So these two are construction details, and this is out of the manual, so I have the page number here. So for example, we have a house, driveway, here's a road, and your property is sloping towards the roadway, okay? So everything is sloping towards the road. Well, the purpose of these controls is to minimize the muddy water going onto the street and going into the storm drain. So the line with the hash marks is your silt fence. Does everybody know what silt fence is? I'll have pictures later. So it's basically a barrier. So this fabric here on this picture is silt fence, and it's basically a perimeter control. And when you have a storm event, water's running down your dirty property and it's being caught by this perimeter, and it's minimizing the muddy water going onto the street. So that's what this barrier is here and on this side of the driveway. The driveway has a rock construction entrance. That's another BMP. So the rock construction entrance is put on there from the existing pavement to where your earth disturbance activity is. So if you have vehicles going on and off of your disturbed activity, the rock is supposed to help knock off some of that big mud and minimize mud going onto the street and going into your storm drains. They also put in this channel. So they dug in a ditch on the upslope side of their earth disturbance activity, and we call that a clean water channel. And so a clean water channel collects the clean water from up above before it runs through your construction activity. So that's actually helping you whenever you're building your house as far as keeping or managing stormwater. And so that clean water channel takes the clean water and dumps it off over onto, somebody else's property. But that helps with keeping the property dry and this portion here is being protected by the silt fence, and then your rock construction entrance. So those are examples. This one over here is sloped to the back of the property, so you need silt fence to the back of your property because that's where your water is going to flow during a storm event. Does that all make sense? Okay, so we had this ABAC BMP that we were talking about for individual permits, and they're more beefed up BMPs. So recently, DEP, it used to be for high quality, exceptional value watersheds where you would have to use ABAC controls. They recently changed that to include impaired streams. So if your watershed is impaired to, say, siltation or nutrients, then you are supposed to be using ABAC controls. And so here's the difference between ABAC and a regular BMP. So this is a rock construction entrance. This is what you would put in from the existing paved roadway back to your construction activity. And it's just basically like a 150-foot long rock entrance. That's a regular rock construction entrance. This is an ABAC to your regular rock construction entrance. That's a wash rack. So you put the wash rack in. You can't really tell here, but your road is up here. You would put the wash rack in probably about 25, maybe 15 feet from your pavement that you're going to get off of. And you basically have some sort of water source to clean off your tires before you leave. So the wash rack is there as a beefed up control. Silt fence down here. So like I said, this is a perimeter control. Runs along the downslope side of your project. Silt fence is not a ABAC BMP. The ABAC BMP to silt fence is the compost sock. Have you seen that compost sock before? People are using that more because it's easier to install. So that compost sock is an ABAC control.
What's that called again?
Compost filter sock? Yeah.
I've seen them, I didn't know what the name was.
Yeah, compost filter sock, silt sock. Okay, now we're getting into the stormwater piece of the NPDS permit. So we have, and there's materials over there for homeowner's guide for stormwater BMPs, and this detail is in that manual or guide. And it shows an undeveloped piece of land versus your developed land. Your undeveloped land obviously would have lots of trees, lots of grass, so whenever it rains, everything's pretty much either being evaporated out or soaks up into the ground, and you have less runoff coming off of that undeveloped land. If you develop it and you put in driveway, a house, you're adding impervious areas where water can no longer soak into the ground. So you have more runoff coming off of that developed land. So we call this post-construction stormwater management, best management practice, which is PCSM BMP, and we put them into place due to the increase in impervious surfaces, like I said. The interruption of the natural hydraulic cycle of gradual percolation of water through vegetation and soil. So we use permanent, non-structural, we can use permanent structures or non-structural facilities to manage the volume, rate, and water quality during stormwater events. So underneath the state requirements are only for water quality, rate, and volume. That's all that the state is required to look at. Now, the municipalities have different ordinances than the state. So if someone comes in for an NPDS permit, if, say, the municipality's ordinance, stormwater ordinance, is more strict than the state's ordinance, stormwater ordinance, then they would have to use the municipality's ordinance. And that happens a lot. I think in Allegheny County, I think Oak Oakmont is one of those municipalities where their stormwater ordinances are more strict than the state's. So part of that stormwater plan, it has to be an engineered plan. A licensed professional has to prepare that plan. So going back to this hydrologic cycle of an undisturbed acre or an area, is you have most of your runoff is being taken back up into the sky. And then you have some of it infiltrating back into the ground and recharging your aquifer, and you have very little that's runoff. So that is your natural hydrologic cycle of how water goes through. And so the state wants to mimic that natural cycle. So a long time ago, everybody would install what? Big ponds, big structures, hole at the bottom of the pond, so when it rains, water goes in, water goes out. No storage. Now it's more strict. They have to create something natural so that most of your water is being infiltrated into the ground or going up into the sky. So in that stormwater BMP guide, there are some pictures, illustrations of things that you can do on your property as far as managing stormwater. So some of them could be a rain garden. This would be your rain garden. So you tie your downspouts into a low area of your property, put some plantings in there. Water is essentially supposed to go in, fill up, and then soak back into the ground rather than just running off into the stream or onto the street. A lot of people are doing these pits where they dig a hole and fill it up with stone, and it acts like a sump. So water goes in, kind of soaks through. That one actually has some sort of a trash collector, so you would have to clean that out. And then there would be some sort of like an overflow. So if it overflew, we had a bigger storm event, water would come up out of the top and flow over. And then amended soil. So if you have a yard that is compacted over time, you can amend the soil by scarifying it up, adding sand, compost to it. That's another non-structural, that's a non-structural BMP. And then the number one BMP is stabilization. So that is the number one BMP, is to get grass growing back, planting trees, because that will keep the soil intact.
You had in your prior shot there, you also had rain barrels.
Yes, rain barrels.
Does the Conservation District do anything with grants to facilitate rain barrels in residential neighborhoods?
So we recently did have a rain barrel workshop. Does Rich want to talk about that, or?
They did have, every year, the Conservation District, our watershed specialist, has a rain barrel workshop. But if you have any people in your township that want rain barrels, call the Conservation District, we'll see what we can do for you. We can always provide the technical support, and maybe if we have some extra rain barrels, we can help out. So just have them give us a call, and we'll be of some help to them.
Yeah, well, I'm sure all of you found out this workshop on Facebook of some sorts. So if you give out your email address, we can send you information on upcoming workshops. I think that rain barrel workshop was what, like a week or so ago?
First,
Okay.
and typically we pass out 20 rain barrel kits. Next year we are looking to up it, so if anyone's interested, please just let us know, so we can amend the grant annually.
Okay, so I apologize, you can't see this checklist, but this is out of the manual on page 356, and this is a checklist on how to find out what kind of information materials you need for an erosion and sediment plan. So number 1 is a narrative, which is going to be a report, and the second item is going to be a plan drawing. And part of chapter 102, the E&S plan should be prepared by a person trained and experienced in E&S control methods and techniques. And so this checklist in that manual, like I said, the manual is going to be your handy dandy guide. The checklist is going to help you on what you need for that E&S plan. And like I said, anything 5,000 square feet, less than an acre, you're not obligated to send it into the district for review unless the municipality requires it.
What if a neighbor would complain about the,
So we do get complaints, and we are delegated to go out to do complaints. If we go out to do a complaint, we are obligated to ask for an E&S plan. Yep, absolutely.
And if there is an E&S plan on site, then we would ask them to write one submitted to us, and there is a review fee that we then have to charge them. So it's best for them to have it done
in the first place?
Yes.
Okay, for anything over an acre, you're gonna need an NPDS permit. This checklist is actually on the notice of intent, which is the NPDS application. And the checklist goes over what types of materials you need. And a few things that I have here is your stormwater plan, the E&S plan. You have a notice, an NOI, which is your application. You have an E&S and you have stormwater modules that basically mimic your E&S narrative. You have forms that have to go to the municipality and the counties to let them know that you're going to be doing this type of earth disturbance over 1 acre. And there is a P&DI. So the P&DI, and I'll just go over that briefly now because we'll go over that again underneath chapter 105, but that's basically a tool underneath the Pennsylvania Natural Heritage Program, and it is a tool to depict threatened endangered species and special concern species in the area that you're going to be doing disturbance. Okay, that's chapter 102. Any questions?